Globalization is the idea that nations are interconnected to create a network of relationships that span across the planet. It can take place in physical means, such as the transfer of goods, services, money, and people across borders. On the other hand, it can be intangible, such as the spread of ideas, information, and cultural practices. Oftentimes, technology is a product of globalization due to the spread of physical and intangible resources. Globalization is multidimensional and commonly discussed in economic, political, and cultural terms. Economic globalization involves the role of global institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and World Trade Organization. Economic globalization focuses on promoting economic neoliberalism. This idea seeks to move out of the public sector of the economy into the private sector through privatization, austerity, and trade liberalization in order to balance the economy. It relies on supply and demand. Political globalization is the increased trend of two or more nations in a decision-making process. This is also known as multilateralism. The UN is a key player in political globalization. Finally, cultural globalization involves the emerging of two cultures. This can be seen in transnational communities and hybrid identities. Globalization is directly related to feminist theory because globalization adversely affects women. Economic neoliberalism is tied to the feminization of labor and poverty. Transnational feminism, defined by Amrita Basu, is a network surrounding women's issues. Transnational feminism is a form of globalization because it is the spread of ideas across borders. Both globalization and transnational feminism challenge the idea that there is a singular solution for the global economy and women's issues. Identity, social structure, and social location often need to be considered when thinking about globalization and transnational feminism. Additionally, women, especially those of the global south, are often victims of the repercussions of globalization. It is important to recognize the connection between gender and globalization. Sri Lanka is one example of how the many dimensions of globalization adversely affect women. In the ethnography, Juki Girls, Good Girls, Gender and Cultural Politics in Sri Lanka's Global Garment Industry, Katrin Rinch researches about how economic neoliberalism influences Sri Lankan women. The implementation of structural adjustment policies by the Sri Lankan government intersects with the dimensions of globalization, especially economically and culturally. Sri Lankan women embraced economic globalization because they were more likely to be selected than men to work in factories. Working in the garment factories gave them the ability to make a living for their family. At the same time, there was a struggle with cultural globalization because working in the factory was seen as conforming with the West. A negative stigma came along with working in garment factories because Sri Lankan women were expected to follow Sinhala and Sri Lankan traditions. Being described as a Juki girl due to the employment in a garment factory symbolized a loss for tradition and conforming to the West. This could negatively affect a woman's marriage and income. Because of this, Sri Lankan women began policing their looks and actions because they did not want to ruin their good girl image. Globalization is an important feminist keyword because women are often the victims of the repercussions of globalization. Similarly to transnational feminism, The implementation of ideas can influence people differently depending on their identity and social location. Economic neoliberalism may be helpful for Western countries, but they are adversely affecting women of the global South. The positive and negatives of globalization can be seen economically, politically, and culturally.